Hello and welcome to the Criterion preview for January of the year of our Lord 2017. It's a new year, but still on that same old grind, doing the same old thing. If you don't know what this series is, basically I go through the Criterion collection releases for each month of the year. In this case, it is for January. I'm going to be talking about what sort of stuff is coming with them, what the films are, who they're by, and what my thoughts on said films are. For any full-length reviews I make regarding these films, you'll be able to find them in the description of this video or at the end of this video. Anyway, let's get straight into it. First film is His Girl Friday, the 1940 screwball comedy from the ever-fantastic Howard Hawks. If you've ever seen Bringing Up Baby, this is very much in the same style of that film. Follows Cary Grant as this hard-boiled newspaper editor who attempts to stop his ex-fiancée, played by Rosalind Russell, from marrying another man. The only catch is that she's leaving with him tomorrow, and it kind of sets up this race against time element in the film. The plot of this film is really generic, but the film isn't really about that, so don't concern yourself with the fact that this film sounds like it would be terrible. It really isn't. This film is just electrifyingly fast-paced. It's kind of unbelievable how quick the dialogue, the back and forth between Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell simply is. Like with Bringing Up Baby, there is just some great dialogue here, and the comedic timing that Hawks has is just perfect. It can get a little overwhelming at times, but for the most part, it's just a joy just to sit back and watch, or rather have thrust into your senses. This is pretty straightforward, honestly. There's not really a lot of artistic analysis required with this type of film. Comedy still holds up today, obviously, and I would highly recommend checking this out if you're in the mood for something kind of light and very funny. Overall, it's an 83 out of 100 for me. This release includes a new high-def restoration of His Girl Friday, a 4K restoration of The Front Page, which was a 1931 film based on the same Broadway play that His Girl Friday was based on. It's interesting to note as well that Howard Hawks actually produced The Front Page but didn't direct it. There's an interview from the film scholar David Bordwell about His Girl Friday, archival interviews from Howard Hawks on His Girl Friday, featurettes about Howard Hawks and Rosalind Russell and the making of His Girl Friday, radio adaptations of the Front Page play from 1937 and 1946, a radio adaptation of His Girl Friday from 1940, and why there are so many adaptations in this release, I don't know. Also comes with new pieces on the restoration of The Front Page and the screenwriter/playwright for it, Ben Hecht. There's also a trailer for the film and an insert with essays on His Girl Friday and The Front Page from the film critics Ferran Smith-Nemeth and Michael Shrugov. Alright, up next is The 400 Blows, the very, very famous 1956 film from French director Francois Truffaut. Like with Godard's Breathless, there's not really any need to introduce this film. This is one of the most famous, essential, and influential art films ever made. If you haven't seen this, but are in any way interested in the more artistic aspects of film, in particular French New Wave, this is an absolute necessity to see. If you're unaware, this follows the story of a young 14-year-old boy who falls into this life of petty crime and insolence as a result of his parental upbringing and neglect. While I do really like this film for a lot of reasons, it's another one like Breathless that I'm just not personally an enormous fan of. It's very, very good to analyze, and it's almost perfect in its construction, but I'm not sure. I've just never really been a huge fan of French New Wave, though to be fair, I haven't seen absolutely everything that the movement has to offer. But I think I've seen enough to kind of make up my mind on it that it's not necessarily something for me. The way I'm making this out makes it sound like this film is bad or something. It isn't. It's an 85 out of 100, but even so, that number is very, very difficult to give to a film, or films in general, that are just extremely influential. I mean, the impact of this film and something like Breathless, it's just unimaginable to consider the extraordinary influence these films had. And for that reason, I'd recommend this on the basis that it is a must watch, a little bit over its actual artistic merit. This release includes a restored high-definition transfer, and I kind of wish Criterion were a little bit more specific with this at times. It'd be good to know if it was 1080p, 2K, 4K, though I'm honestly kind of surprised that something as famous as this film wouldn't have a 4K restoration. This comes with 2 audio commentaries, one from the film professor Brian Stonehill and the other from Truffaut's longtime friend Robert Lacanet. Also includes quote-unquote rare audition footage of Jean-Pierre Léaud, the child in the film who would go on to star in some of the most important French films ever made by some of the most important French directors ever, like Godard and Rivette. There's also audition footage of Patrick Orphy and Richard Cunningham, and if you haven't heard those names, it's not surprising because they were these boys who also auditioned for the lead role in the film but didn't get it. And the interesting aspect of that is that a lot of the boys who failed the audition for the lead role were chosen as extras for all of the classroom scenes in the film, which makes a lot of sense in retrospect, and it's a really cool directorial decision to make. There's also newsreel footage of the film showing at Cannes, excerpts from a 1965 and 1960 interview with Truffaut regarding his youth, critical writings, origins of the character Antoine Doinel, the global reception of the 400 Blows, and his own critical view of the film. Also comes with a trailer for the film and an essay by the film scholar Annette Insdorf. Alright, next up is Something Wild, the 1961 Jack Garfein directed film. Now, just to be very clear, this is not to be confused with the other Something Wild that is also on Criterion, but that film is from 1986 and is completely different in tone to this film. Jack Garfein is a pretty interesting figure as a director, actually. He made some really risky and boundary-pushing films like this one, but he's mainly famous for his really senior role at the Actors Studio, which, if you're not aware, is a very prestigious institute that has pumped out a ton of very high-quality, award-winning method actors. And on the topic of boundary-pushing, risky films, Something Wild falls directly into that category. This film essentially follows this quite young teenage girl who is brutally raped and kind of attempts suicide, and the film somewhat follows a kind of rape revenge narrative, but it is very subversive in doing this. And I'm trying to basically give nothing about the film away because anything you talk about with this is very, very spoiler heavy. In the most broad terms, this is like a very early psychological thriller and character study, and it is very, very bold for a 1961 American film. In fact, I'm kind of shocked that this was able to be released. And in fact, this was actually Jack Garfein's last film, somewhat for that reason. He'd released previous films that had had similar controversy surrounding them, and this film was no exception. Like with One-Eyed Jacks, which I discussed in a previous Criterion preview, I haven't really made up my mind with this film. It's fascinating from a contextual perspective, and I cannot believe that they were able to release this in 1961. And the film is also remarkably experimental, and yet again, I don't want to give anything away here in regards to that. It's definitely something I'll want to watch again, and it is a good film, but I'm just giving this a heart for now, which is just an abstract, I cannot rate this film numerically rating. On that point, I'm not even sure who I would really recommend this to. Anyone who's interested in some pretty out there independent American cinema, I guess check this one out. This release includes a new 2K digital transfer supervised by Jack Garfein himself, which is great, a new conversation between Garfein and the critic Kim Morgan, a new interview with lead actress Carol Baker, an interview titled Behind the Method with scholar Foster Hirsch discussing the Actors Studios that Jack Garfein had a major part in. On that same thread, there is a video titled Masterclass with Jack Garfein featuring excerpts from a 2014 recording of one of his quote-unquote world-famous lectures on method acting. This also comes with an essay by the critic Sheila O'Malley. Alright, next up is Fox and Friends, the 1975 film from Werner Fassbinder. Another brilliant piece from the very famous and very gay German New Wave director Werner Fassbinder. I am loving the attention that Fassbinder is getting here on Criterion. They're just releasing amazing film after amazing film from him, and of course this is no exception. This is a very simple story done well. A gay German circus artist miraculously wins the lottery and then proceeds to be exploited by his kind of pompous, rich gay partner who basically preys on him for his wealth. It is a very simple rags to riches and rags again plot that is very remarkably reminiscent of Barry Lyndon, which funnily enough came out in the same year as this film. The plot is so predictable and simple that you can essentially predict the entire film within the first 5 minutes, but that does not matter. Essentially, on a technical level, this film is brilliant, the acting is amazing, and Fassbinder himself actually plays the main character here. His cinematography is beautifully 70s, with just some striking blues and yellows and browns of the 70s coming through. His style, as always, is elegant, raw, and like Something Wild, quite unbelievable to have been released in 1975. And in fact, as far as I'm aware, there was actually quite a bit of controversy regarding this film. Also, like with basically every other Fassbinder film, everyone seems to be gay and or nude most of the time, which hey, I'm fine with that, but if you don't like big swinging dicks just most of the time hanging around, don't watch this. I really liked this film, far more than I actually expected to. It actually might be my favorite Fassbinder, though I'm not sure on that. I've always been a massive contrarian and loved Carell, but this film is also just simply brilliant. Overall, it is a 93 out of 100 for me. This release includes a new 4K digital restoration undertaken by the Werner Fassbinder Foundation, and it is very cool that Fassbinder's original company actually did this. A new interview with the actor Harry Bayer, who plays quite a small but pivotal role in the film. A new interview with the filmmaker Ira Sachs, whose films often center on gay issues, which I guess is fitting for Fassbinder, but the exact reason why they're interviewing this guy, I'm not sure. Lots of people make films centering on gay issues, and it's not very clear if Ira Sachs will be discussing Fassbinder or just his own films. I don't know. It's also excerpts from interviews with Fassbinder and the composer for the film, Pierre Rabin. And finally, this release comes with a trailer, new English subtitle translations, and an essay by the film critic Michael Koreski. Next up is Black Girl, the 1966 film directed by Ousmane Sembene. I apologize in advance, I'm going to be basically butchering all of these names horribly, and you'll see why in a second. This film is renowned as basically the first really internationally critically successful African film, with it picking up the Grand Prix at Cannes and being directed by basically the most renowned African director of the 20th century. This film follows a poor African girl who finds work cleaning and housekeeping and apparently babysitting for a rich French couple in France. Essentially, it documents her increasing feelings of isolation and pain being separated from her family and stuck with these really frigid, pompous people. Yet again, like with Something Wild, it is kind of hard to judge a film like this. I like it for a lot of reasons. The cinematography is surprisingly stark and beautiful. The black and white has just a beautiful contrast, and there's a really fantastic accentuation and use of lines in this film. The acting is also fantastic, but at the same time, it's only an hour long. There's some very odd continuity issues, and the plot is kind of weak and frail. It actually reminded me a lot of almost a proto version of this other amazing French film called Un Honky D'Or, or The Man Who Sleeps, but it's quite inferior to that film. I'll also say that this film, yet again, like Something Wild, Fox and Friends as well, makes some very bold decisions and some very strong commentary for 1966, so it's largely notable on that level, I think. Also, like with 400 Blows, I think I'd recommend this more as a part of essential cinema to watch, like coming at it from the perspective that it was the first really famous African film, rather than for the actual active enjoyment of watching it. Overall, it's a 72 out of 100 for me. This release includes a new 4K restoration undertaken by the Film Foundation's World Cinema Project, a 4K restoration of Ousmane's short film Boardroom Saré, which was apparently critically acclaimed when it was released in 1963, new interviews with the scholars Manthia Diawara and Samba Gajigo, an excerpt from a 1966 broadcast of Ousmane accepting the Grand Prix at Cannes for Black Girl, new interview with the lead actress of the film with that name I'm not going to try to pronounce, a 1994 documentary called Sembene, The Making of African Cinema, about Ousmane of course, by the filmmaker Manthia Diawara and this guy, an alternate color sequence. Not actually sure what this means considering the film is in black and white. Maybe it's a part that was shot in color but not actually in the film. I don't know. You guys get a color sequence. Take it or leave it, I don't care. Also comes with a trailer for the film, new English subtitles, and an essay by the critic Ashley Clark. And that wraps up all of the films for this month, so I'm going to move into giving some recommendations. What would I pick out of all the films this month if I could only pick one to own? Well, I think the pretty clear-cut winner for me is Fox and His Friends. In terms of sheer objective artistic experience and quality, this film stands quite tall above the rest. One of the reasons for that being that the 400 Blows, Something Wild, Black Girl are more fundamental from the perspective of knowing cinema rather than enjoying cinema purely for the art form. Fox and His Friends is arguably a very important film for multiple reasons, particularly to do with its handling of gay issues, but of course something like the 400 Blows is so essential to an understanding of art cinema and just cinema in general, and Something Wild and Black Girl are so interesting from a contextual perspective about what they did at the time that was quite risky, boundary defining, or the sort of commentary that they laid on, like Black Girl essentially dealing with a lot of colonial and racial issues which were very risky to discuss at that time. In that sense, I would highly recommend Fox and His Friends purely from a quality perspective, but if you haven't seen 400 Blows or you just enjoy the film, it is definitely worth having on your shelf. There is no reason why not seeing that film would ever be useful to you, and there's no downside to owning it because it's such an essential piece of cinema. If you want something a little lighter and comedic, then check out His Girl Friday. And yet again, I'm not exactly sure who I'd recommend Something Wild or Black Girl to. I guess check them out if you're interested in either the independent film movement in the 1960s and some really risky stuff that was being done then. I think Peeping Tom is one of the other examples I can think of that kind of fits into that category, but very loosely. And I guess if you're interested in African cinema or getting into African cinema, then check out Black Girl. Though I think just from my experience, the only other African film that's critically acclaimed that I can think of is Tuki Buki, and I have never ever been able to find a copy of that. So I'm very glad, I suppose, that Criterion are actually bringing Black Girl to light as well. And that's it. Check out these other videos here. There's going to be a channel update video coming out for those who are interested in terms of talking about what sort of videos I'm going to be making in the future, particularly for 2017. Nothing extremely drastic, but I think some pretty beneficial changes. So look out for that. Check out these other things, and yeah, au revoir.